Burt Lancaster and Lee Marvin were never supposed to collide like this. But on Christmas Eve, 1965, in Death Valley, California, Hollywood's illusion of masculinity cracked wide open. I was 23 years old when I witnessed it. A night so quiet it felt unreal. The desert heat had finally loosened its grip, just enough to remind us we were still human. Most of the crew had disappeared into their rooms, clutching letters from home, waiting their turn at the single payphone that worked only when it felt like it. Wives, girlfriends, families, normal life calling from far away. But two men stayed behind, two giants of Hollywood, and before that night ended, they would destroy any chance of ever working together again. I was a camera assistant on a Western called The Professionals. My job was simple: load film magazines, stay invisible, and never speak. But that night, invisibility wasn't an option, because what I witnessed had nothing to do with alcohol, though there was plenty of it. It wasn't about ego, though both men carried enough to fill the desert, and it wasn't about professionalism, though that would later become the official story. It was about something far more dangerous. It was about the question men spend their entire lives trying to answer: are you real, or are you just performing? By sunrise, Burt Lancaster, the most disciplined actor in Hollywood, would be forced to confront a truth he had spent his entire life running from. And Lee Marvin, a decorated war veteran, would reveal why authenticity, real, blood-earned authenticity, can become its own kind of prison. To understand why Burt Lancaster truly hated Lee Marvin, you have to look beyond the fame, beyond the films, beyond the legends. You have to look at the men underneath the performance. And I promise you this: what you're about to hear isn't the story you think it is. Burt Lancaster was born on November 2, 1913 in East Harlem, New York. His father worked for the Postal Service. The family wasn't starving, but they were poor enough that young Burton Stephen Lancaster learned early that nothing would be handed to him. East Harlem was rough. If you couldn't fight, you didn't survive. But Lancaster discovered something more valuable than fists. His body could do things other bodies couldn't. He could flip, tumble, and launch himself through the air like gravity was optional. Think of Lancaster as a man building a cathedral stone by stone, except the cathedral was himself. Every movement was controlled, every weakness corrected. By the time he reached Hollywood, he didn't just look strong, he looked invincible. By 1965, at 52 years old, Lancaster was more than an actor. He was a producer, a businessman, a power player who defied the studio system by forming his own production company. In an era when actors were treated like property, Lancaster declared independence. His discipline was legendary: 5 a.m. wake-ups, desert runs, brutal calisthenics that exhausted men half his age. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke, he didn't deviate. He memorized his lines so completely he could recite them backwards. He arrived on set exactly on time, not early, not late, because precision mattered. In an industry fueled by chaos, Lancaster was an anomaly, a monk in a casino. And whether he meant to or not, he radiated quiet contempt for those who didn't build themselves the same way. But what no one understood, what even Lancaster may not have admitted, was that all that control was compensating for something, and the man who would expose it was everything Lancaster could never out-discipline. Lee Marvin was born on February 19, 1924 in New York City, 11 years younger than Lancaster, but in lived experience, he might as well have been from another world. In 1942, at just 18 years old, Marvin enlisted in the United States Marines, not for glory, not for patriotism, but because he wanted to know what he was made of. He found out on Saipan in June 1944, one of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific War. Teenagers died screaming for their mothers. Marvin was shot by a sniper. The bullet tore through his body and damaged his sciatic nerve. He spent 13 months in naval hospitals and received the Purple Heart. He walked with a limp for the rest of his life, but the visible wound was nothing compared to the invisible ones. If Lancaster was a cathedral, Marvin was a bombed-out building still standing, cracked walls, shifted foundations, but undeniably real. By 1965, Marvin had just won the Academy Award for Cat Ballou. He became Hollywood's new definition of danger. When Marvin played tough men, audiences didn't believe him, they recognized him. The drinking wasn't a problem, it was a solution. When you've watched boys die in sand, whiskey isn't recreation, it's medicine. On set, Marvin was chaotic. He arrived late, he forgot choreography, he drank constantly. But when the camera rolled, everything snapped into place. The chaos became truth. The crew split into camps. Team Lancaster versus Team Marvin. Discipline versus trauma. Performance versus authenticity. What no one understood was that both sides were wrong. This wasn't about control versus chaos. It was about two men trapped by different definitions of strength. Death Valley did what it always does. It stripped people bare. Lancaster arrived with a truck full of gym equipment. Marvin arrived with suitcases full of bottles. The first table reads said everything. Lancaster was early, prepared, and annotated. The tension grew during a dangerous cliff sequence in Valley of Fire, Nevada, on November 12, 1965. The scene demanded precision and sobriety. Lancaster arrived early and rehearsed repeatedly. Marvin arrived nearly an hour late. The scene should have taken 2 hours. It took 9. From my camera position above them, I watched Lancaster's frustration turn into something darker. Because Lancaster had spent his life proving discipline could conquer anything, and here was Marvin, broken, drunk, undisciplined, still magnetic. 3 weeks later, Christmas Eve arrived, and with it, the breaking point. The catering tent became a makeshift bar, a thin attempt at celebration in the middle of Death Valley. Someone produced real bourbon, the kind that tasted like home. Lee Marvin was there, loud, loose, and holding court. Burt Lancaster was not. At 10:30 p.m., Lancaster was outside his trailer, alone, doing push-ups in the cold desert air. The brutal heat of the day had vanished, replaced by a silence that carried voices across the sand. At 11:17 p.m., Marvin's voice cut through it, unfiltered, sharp. He mocked Lancaster's discipline, calling it fear. He called him a performer, a man who played warriors without ever being one. Lancaster heard every word. When he stepped into the tent, the laughter died instantly. The room went still. "Say it again," Lancaster said calmly. Marvin didn't hesitate. He spoke about World War II, about Saipan, about real blood, real death, and young men dying in the sand. He accused Lancaster of never being there when it mattered. Then Lancaster did the unexpected. He agreed. He admitted he never saw combat. But then he spoke the truth Marvin never wanted to hear. Discipline was real. Building yourself mattered. Trauma, he said, was not an achievement. You had strength handed to you by a bullet, Lancaster said. I built mine every day. Then he ended it. You will never work with me again. And he walked away. The film wrapped in January 1966. Lancaster and Marvin never shared a shot again. The Professionals became a hit. Critics praised the tension. The men never spoke again. Decades later, the truth finally surfaced. I found Burt Lancaster's military file. Multiple attempts to enlist, all rejected. Flat feet, a lingering circus injury. The strongest man in Hollywood was never allowed to fight. And suddenly, everything made sense. Every push-up wasn't vanity, it was penance. And Lee Marvin? His war trauma was both his proof and his prison. Without it, who was he? 2 men, 2 prisons, both real, both performing, and both missed the same truth. Authenticity isn't earned, it's accepted. You don't have to prove you're real, you already are. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe, because some truths deserve to be remembered.